Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Good to be back. Back after a long hiatus, stretching all the way back to before Pesach, but we
Mhm.
are back now, hopefully for the long haul. Masechet Beitzah, as you all know. So I thought it's been a very, very long time. So let's go back a little bit. We do a little bit of Chazara, help us get back into the Gemara, because I know there's been a long break. We got up to about Daf Yud Gimel, because it's somewhat in the
Mhm.
middle of Sugya. I thought let's go back onto Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet. You'd bet I would bet. Maybe let's just look at the Mishnah again and take it from there. So if you'll remember, hopefully, that we discussed before the break, we got onto this discussion regarding Trumot, and other matnat kohuna, really, and when it comes to Yom Tov specifically, right? The issue was we have all sorts of things which we separate from produce. We have Trumot and Masrot, other types of matnot kuna. Truma obviously goes to the Kohen. Masrot goes to the Levi and to others. Um, the Levi is as well required to take trumat maaser from his maaser. He has to separate truma, right? That's to distinguish from truma gdola, which is taken from all the produce, and then trumat maaser, which is taken from the maaser itself. That also goes to the Kohen. In addition, there are certain parts of the animal which are matanot kuna as well as chala. When you have a dough of a certain quantity, you'd be required to separate chala to give that to the kohen. Again, a lot of these things nowadays work a little bit differently because we don't have the ability to eat things in tahara, so it has to get burnt or whatever it is. One example where we still can use truma is if you have oil, which is truma, and that's given to the kohen, and the kohen can use those for his Hanukkah candles, etc. Because truma you can burn, you don't have to be in tahara as like you do when you have to eat it. But essentially, the topic of the Mishnah is, right, what happens with separating, and there are two parts to this. There is both separating and delivering these gifts on Yom Tov. Would that be permitted or not? Right? In terms of separating, so on Shabbat, one is not allowed to separate it. One's not allowed to separate trumot, masrot, etc. It looks like it's nireh kemetaken because the food was tevel beforehand. You weren't able to eat it. Now you are able to eat it. So it looks like you are fixing it, so to speak. And that was similar to the melachot, maybe of boner, maybe of makeb patish. In any event, it's an isud rabbanan to separate on Shabbat. We'll see if Yom Tov is any different in that regard. And even if you have separated these gifts, or you are allowed to separate them, could you still deliver them to the Kohen? Right. So that's the topic of the Mishnah. I know that we've discussed it in the past, but as I say, it's been a long, long, long time. So let's go through it again. So says the Mishnah again, we're on Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet, and we have here Machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And you may or may not recall that the Gemara then has three different ways to understand exactly what the Machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is, and based on that, we try to understand which opinion is our Mishnah is following. And then once we know, or maybe don't know which opinion our Mishnah is following, then we go into another side discussion based on one of those opinions. So, said the Mishnah, Beit Shammai Amrim, Ein molichin chala matanot lakohen b'yom tov, ben shumu me'emesh, ben shumu me'ayom. Beit Shammai, as we're accustomed to, usually the ones who have it take a more stringent approach. So Beit Shammai says we do not, Ein molichin, we do not deliver neither chala nor matanot to a kohen on Yom Tov. Notice the Mishnah has not yet mentioned truma. We're going to mention truma a bit later on. But so he says this chala and matanot kuna we do not deliver on Yom Tov to the kohen. Now Rashi points out here, he says ein molichin chala afal bishumotah afal shata lo shal leolachata. Even though, okay, and this is different to Shabbat in the sense that you are allowed to separate it. You're allowed to separate challah on Yom Tov. Everybody agrees. Why is that? Because on Yom Tov you can bake. You can knead the dough and you can bake. So there was no obligation for challah before Yom Tov. You didn't have the dough. So you're baking on Yom Tov and you can separate it. However, says Beit Shammai, right? Says Rashi, Lo shall lachata. They don't allow us to deliver it. I.e., you're allowed to do what needs to be done in order that you can eat your dough, and that means you have to separate the challah. Separate it, put it on the side, and after Yom Tov or Chol HaMoed or whenever it is, then you can go and take it to the Kohen. Okay, that's Beit Shammai. Continues the Mishnah. Beit Hillel matirin. Beit Hillel say no, that is permitted. So Amrullah and Beit Shammai Gzera Shava. Chala u'matanot matana lekohen, u'truma matana lekohen. Kshem she'en molichin et ha'truma, kach en molichin et ha'matanot. So Beit Shammai says we learn out from a Gzerah Shavah. It's not a real Gzerah Shavah in the sense that we right, Gzerah Shavah is we have the same word that appears in different psukim in the Torah, and therefore we learn similar halachot one from the other. We know as well that Gzerah Shavah has to be a tradition about it. It's not that anybody can just open up the Chumash, and find two psukim that have the same word and start deriving halachot. But when we say Gzerah Shavah here, it's in the sense of a borrowed term, and that they both have the same name or they're both the same concept. Right? Rashi points out. He says Gzerah Shavah lav dafka to kulam min Rabbanan gazu. He says you can't. This isn't a real Gzerah Shavah. Also, because we're only dealing with a Gzerah D'Rabbanan. And Gzerah Shavah relates to D'Oraita. Ela dumya de Gzerah Shavah D'Rabbanan. Okay, this is like a Gzerah Shavah D'Rabbanan. So, what are we saying? Beit Shammai are saying like this. They say Chala matanot matana lekon. Chala and matanot again. We're talking here about Zroa l'chaim and keva, different parts of meat of the animal, which have to be given over to the Kohen. So these are considered. These are a matana for the Kohen. And you also have another type of matana for the Kohen, which is truma. And he says, Kshem she'en molichin et truma, kach en molichin et matanot. Just like we are not allowed to go and deliver the truma on Yom Tov, and he says, Beit Hillel, you have to agree with me at least on that. So therefore, you're not allowed to deliver the other matanot kona either. Why should there be any sort of difference between them? Beit Hillel answers back, and Beit Hillel says, no, of course there should be a difference between them. Beit Hillel, Amrulem Beit Hillel, lo, im amatim b'truma she'eno zakei b'al hamata, tumud matanot she'zakei b'al hamatan. Says Beit Hillel, essentially, you're comparing apples and oranges, right? You can't say the reason why we have more restrictions when it comes to truma is because, remember, could you separate truma and Yom Tov? And again, we'll see. Now, remember, the Gemara is going to have a long discussion whether this is really the case. Is it really so that there is no case where you would be able to and be required to separate Truma and Yom Tov? But essentially, that is our default position. That is our understanding here, that you cannot separate Truma on Yom Tov. All the other things, you could separate on Yom Tov. Chala, you didn't have the dough beforehand. Therefore, that's how we started off. Therefore, you would have to separate it on Yom Tov. Matanot Kuna. Also, you didn't shech the animal before Yom Tov. Now you shech it on Yom Tov, so now you can separate it. Truma, what's the problem? I mean, this fruit existed; it was in the world. What's the problem of separating the truma before Yom Tov? There's no problem. You could have done it, and therefore, anything you could have done before Yom Tov, we expect you to do before Yom Tov, and not to wait until Yom Tov to do it. In fact, I think I mentioned previously. This is how many of the Rishonim understand, it's even brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, that some of the restrictions when it comes to melacha on Yom Tov, right? We know that on Yom Tov we can perform melechet ochel nefesh, but we can't do every melacha which is for ochel nefesh, right? So cooking and baking, etc., is permitted, but there are certain melachot that are earlier on in the process, which even if they were performed for the reason of in terms of preparing food, you would not be allowed to do them on Yom Tov. And even when it comes to cooking and baking, etc., there are certain cases, limited cases, but certain cases where even that would not be permitted on Yom Tov. When in a situation where it could have been done before Yom Tov, okay? And either we say that Chazal don't want you to leave all your melacha and spend Yom Tov as a day of work, or if it could have been done before, the only reason why you're allowed to perform it on Yom Tov is because you couldn't do it before. That's why the Torah allows us to cook. Because essentially Yom Tov sometimes, okay, now we have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot, but even before that, sometimes you would have had a Yom Tov Samuch LeShabbat, and in days of yore, right? If you had 2 days in a row in which people didn't have fridges and freezers, etc., 2 days in a row in which you can't cook, you're not going to have anything to eat. You're not going to have any food. It's going to be impossible, and therefore you're allowed to cook. So why is it that nowadays we can cook beforehand or we can refrigerate things? So the poskim say, nonetheless, everybody knows it's not the same to eat a freshly cooked meal as to eat something which has been taken out and heated up and been frozen or whatever it is. There is still a qualitative difference in the food that is freshly cooked, and therefore, since we can't prepare it to the same degree, you can't make freshly cooked food for Yom Tov before Yom Tov, right? You can only make freshly cooked Yom Tov food there and then. Therefore, you're allowed to still cook for Yom Tov. Certain examples of foods which take a long time to cook and actually get better after when they've been cooked longer in advance. That is a question. That is a question whether that could be done on, that can be better on Yom Tov as well. Okay, but therefore, essentially, what we're saying is, forget about Truma. So Beit Shammai say you can't deliver the Truma on Yom Tov, right? Just like, sorry, Beit Shammai say you can't deliver the Chala and the Matanot on Yom Tov, just like you can't deliver the Truma on Yom Tov. Beit Hillel says, what are you talking about? Truma is different because Truma you could have done beforehand, but this you can't do beforehand, and therefore it's going to be permitted. Okay, Adkan, that's the Mishnah. And again, all we know from the Mishnah is that we have this machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding chala and regarding matanot kona. Now the Gemara says there are three opinions we have in the Tanaim, and it's not clear if our Mishnah really fits in with any of them. Says the Gemara, Kasal kadatach, she'omu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom, v'she'omu me'emesh v'nishchatu me'emesh. Okay, this is essentially the first two kimta that we're putting in the Mishnah. If you have a look again, the opening lines of the Mishnah said, Beit Shammai remain malachin chala matanot lakohen beyom tov ben shomu me'emesh ben shomu me'ayom. Right? Again, the Ravuta over there, the Mishnah wants to emphasize for us that Beit Shammai say even if these things were separated today, I separated on Yom Tov, you still can't deliver them to the Kohen. But nonetheless, the language is ben shomu me'emesh ben shehumu me'ayom. Humu means that they were separated. So says the Gemara, Kasal Gadatach, we would think that it means as follows: Shehumu me'ayom, v'shenishchatu me'ayom, v'shehumu me'emesh, v'shenishchatu me'emesh. In other words, that these matanot which were separated, whether it was today or yesterday, goes by as well the time when the animal was shechted. So even if the animal was shechted on Erev Yom Tov, or it was shechted on Yom Tov itself, either way, if you separate the matanot on Yom Tov, then you can't deliver them. Says Beit Shammai. So now, based on that understanding, based on that reading of the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Mani, whose opinion in the Tanaim does our Mishnah follow? Mani matnitin. And here we have a problem. Lo Rabbi Yossi, v'lo Rabbi Yehuda, ela acherim. Okay, not really a problem, but we say it's not the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, it's not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, it must be the opinion of acherim. As follows: the Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yehuda lo nechlogu Beit Shammai Beit Hillel ala matanot she'omu me'elav Yom Tov shemolechin im hamatanot she'omu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda actually has quite a far-reaching kula. He starts off with what they do agree. He says, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel do not disagree on the following case. Okay, al matanot she'omu me'elav Yom Tov shemolechin im hamatanot she'omu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom. So it says like this: if you have an animal which was shechted, or you have animals which were shechted on Yom Tov, so clearly on Yom Tov you can therefore separate the matanot because you didn't have them before because you hadn't shechted the animal. And once you separate them, you can deliver them as well. So the matanot which you are going to deliver on Yom Tov, those which were separated when the animal was shechted on Yom Tov itself, so together with that you can deliver the matanot from the animal that was shechted yesterday, that was separated before, right? And again, lo nechloku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel ala matanot shehumu me'elav Yom Tov, those matanot which were separated before Yom Tov, shemolechin im hamatanot shehumu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom. You can bring them together along with those. Essentially, that it's they become tafel to the main. They become tafel to the main gift now, which I'm bringing, and brings to mind there's an interesting halachic discussion regarding Yom Tov, regarding carrying. Okay, here we're not talking about the malacha of carrying. Here the issue is probably just the tircha that you're doing. But what happens if we know that on Yom Tov there is no malacha of hotza'ah? So if you live in a place where there's no eruv, or people who don't rely on the eruv, right? So on Yom Tov you don't have to worry. You're allowed to carry. You're allowed to carry, however, whatever you need. Letzorech Yom Tov. You can carry things which there's a need, there's some sort of a Yom Tov need for it. Things which you don't have any need for on Yom Tov, you wouldn't be able to carry. So the question comes up regarding keys. If I have keys on a keychain, right? So I have my house keys and maybe my car keys, or maybe I have different keys, which let's assume it's not electric, right? But I have different keys which I have no use for. I have my office key, let's say, on Yom Tov, which is in a place where I'm not going to go, not going to have access, not going to need it. Is one allowed to bring the entire keychain, or does one have to remove the particular keys which one needs, which one needs for Yom Tov? Again, all of this is in a place there's no Erev. So the Shemrat Shabbat Kilchata brings a case. I don't now remember offhand if it was Rav Shlomo Zalman that said, or maybe Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. I don't recall. I think it was Rav Moshe Feinstein. Going back a number of years before they knew about the health damage in cigarettes. So there was a time when poskim allowed. Nowadays, most poskim do not allow one to smoke, not during the week and not on Yom Tov. And it's very, very difficult nowadays to find an agreed upon heter for smoking on Yom Tov, even if you were to say that you could smoke during the week, right? In terms of lighting the fire, but at a time when it was considered acceptable. So the question was, if a person is just going to have one cigarette, could you carry out the whole cigarette box? So over there, the answer is yes, you can, because there's maybe it's kind of ribui shiurim, right? Since you need one, so you can carry the whole box. You don't know which one it is that you're going to use. So there were those who wanted to compare from that and say, based on that, the same thing with the keys. Right? Even though you only need one of the keys, you can carry all the keys. Now the chiluk between the cases is obvious. The chiluk is over there in the case of the cigarettes, and again, I emphasize, it's not practical halacha nowadays. Nobody should be smoking, not on a weekday and not on Yom Tov. But there, you don't know which one they're all the same. You could use, theoretically, any one of those cigarettes which is in the box, and therefore that's a ribui b'shiurim. Over here, it's not that you can use any one of the keys. There's only one of the keys you can use. The other ones are different keys, and therefore there would be more of a problem. So there, if a person's in an area where there is no Eruv, not talking about Shabbos, obviously, but on Yom Tov, a person should just carry the key that they need. But in any event, so how do we get onto all of that? So we're saying, yes, if you are carrying you're delivering these matanot kuna, which you are allowed to, that were separated today, according to Rabbi Yehuda, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree, you can throw in the matanot that was sent yesterday, even though you wouldn't be able to carry them by themselves. So that is case number one. Again, on the first wide line of the Gemara, lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel al matanot shumu me'el Yom Tov, shemolichim matanot shumu me'yom, v'shenishchatu me'yom. Lo nechlaku ela lo lechan b'fnei atzman. What is their machloket? Their machloket is, can you just take these matanot kuna, which were separated before Yom Tov by themselves? Beit Shammai omrim ein molichin. Beit Shammai say no. Beit Hillel omrim molichin. Beit Hillel say sure you can. V'kach hayu Beit Shammai danin. Where did Beit Shammai learn this from? They said as follows: Chala u'matanot matana lakohen, u'truma matana lakohen. Kshem she'en molichin et hatruma, kach en molichin et hamatanot. Okay, just like we say that you cannot carry this is opposite to the way we had it in our Mishnah, right? But Shammai over here say, just as you cannot try to deliver the truma on Yom Tov, so too you can't send the matanot. So Amar Beit Hillel, lo imamatim b'truma she'eno zakai b'al mata, tumru b'matanot she'zakai b'al matan. So Beit Hillel again, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing over there, because truma you can't separate it on Yom Tov, and therefore you can't deliver it. But with matanot it's different. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and you see this does not go the same as our Mishnah, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, the only machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding these matanot is when they were taken from yesterday. These matanot that were separated before Yom Tov. Beit Shammai says you cannot deliver those on Yom Tov. Beit Hillel says you can. Okay, so that is opinion number one. That is Rabbi Yehuda. Then we have Rabbi Yossi. And actually, the Gemara is going to say that we paskin like this opinion. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Lo nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel ala matanot shemolichin. Lo nechlaku ala truma. So he says, no, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel's their machlok was not about matanot at all. Everybody agrees that you can that you can deliver the matanot, seemingly, whether they were separated today or before Yom Tov. Lo nechlaku ela truma, but the whole machloket is regarding truma. Shebeit Shammai omrim ein molichin, ubeit Hillel omrim molichin. Shammai says no, and Beit Hillel says yes. V'kach hayu Beit Hillel danim. Chala umatanot matana lakohen utruma matana lakohen. Kshem shemolichin et hamatanot, kach molichin et hatruma. Again, this is somewhat different to the way it's presented in our Mishnah. What's common to all of them is that we're making a gzera shava, right? Min Rabbanan, we're learning from a comparison between matanot and truma, exactly in which direction, exactly who is learning. That's what changes between different opinions. So yeah, Ben Hillel say what? They say just as this is afuch al afuch from our Mishnah. And our Mishnah was learning about whether you can deliver the matanot. Okay, according to Rabbi Yossi, no, the matanot is no question. Matanot, everybody agrees that you can deliver those on Yom Tov. The question is, what about truma? So Beit Hillel learns in that way. He says, just like you can deliver the matanot, so too you can deliver the truma. אמרו להם בית שמאי, לא אם אמרתם מתנות שזכאי בעל המתן, תאמרו בתרומה שאין זכאי בעל המתן. Beit Shammai says, what are you talking about? You can't compare the two cases. And therefore Beit Shammai says, no, you cannot deliver the truma. Okay. But that's going to be the most lenient opinion, because according to that, Beit Shammai would allow you to deliver any of the other matanot as well. Now, opinion number 3. Acheirim omrim, לא נחלקו בית שמאי ובית הלל על התרומה. Right, according to this opinion, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree. Everybody agrees that you cannot deliver the truma on Yom Tov. Right? Why not? Because you could have done it before Yom Tov, and therefore there's no heter for that. לא נחלקו אלא על המתנות, שבית שמאי אומרים אין מוליכין, ובית הלל אומרים מוליכין. But when it comes to matanot kona, Beit Shammai say you can't deliver those to the kohen on Yom Tov, and Beit Hillel say you can. Now that's pretty straightforward. That sounds pretty similar to our Mishnah. And therefore that is why the Gemara wants to say that this third opinion of Acheirim, that's the opinion of our Mishnah. So Leima Acherimi velo Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, it's clear why the Mishnah definitely cannot be like Rabbi Yossi. He's talking about something completely different. According to Rabbi Yehuda, however, it's also problematic, because Rabbi Yehuda said that there was the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel was only related to, by themselves, matanot kuna, which were separated before Yom Tov. The implication is that the matanot kuna, which were separated on Yom Tov, or the shchita took place on Yom Tov, so that even Beit Shammai would allow. Based on what we've just seen in Acheirim seems to say that no, Beit Shammai would not allow that, and that is indeed what we saw in our Mishnah. So that's why it says here. Says the Mishnah. It says the Gemara. Excuse me. Leima Acharimi v'lo Rabbi Yehuda. Samar Rava. Miktani shehumu me'ayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom. Okay. Rava says, wait a minute. Your whole assumption is predicated on the fact that when our Mishnah talks about what Beit Shammai does not allow, it says Ben Shomu me'emesh, Ben Shomu me'ayom, that it's related to that the Mishnah said whether these matanot were separated from the animal before Yom Tov or on Yom Tov, and we just jumped in and said when it says whether they were separated before Yom Tov means that it was shchita before Yom Tov, or whether they were separated on Yom Tov means that it was shchita on Yom Tov. Rava says doesn't actually say that anywhere in the Mishnah. Marava miktani shomu mayom v'shenishchatu me'ayom. Shomu ktani u'le'olam shchitatan me'emesh. Right. All our Mishnah says is that is when the matanot were separated. It doesn't say when the shchita took place. So we could very, very easily establish our Mishnah to say that it's only talking about a case where the shchita took place before Yom Tov. And Beit Shammai says you shechted the animal before Yom Tov, whether you separated the matanot there and then, or whether you waited until Yom Tov itself to then separate the matanot, you cannot deliver them to the Kohen. But there's a case which we're not talking about, which is the case Rabbi Yehuda spoke about, which is what? Which is where if you only shechted the animal on Yom Tov and then separated the matanot, so then obviously Beit Shammai will allow you to transfer it as well. Right? That's what we could say. And that's exactly what Rav is saying. Amar Rav Miktani shomuktani uleolam shchitatan me'emesh le'imar Rabbi Yudai v'lo acherim. If that's the case, well then we can say that our Mishnah is like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and not acherim. So, and then says the Gemara, no, you could even say like that and still say that it's acherim. Afilu teim acherim. Uvahanach denishchatu me'emesh. Okay, related to, in other words, to change the way that we understand what acherim said. And that just as our Mishnah did not explicitly say about when the animal is shechted, the last opinion in the Braita of acherim that others say, right, does not say explicitly where we assumed it to mean everything, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean everything. It could mean just that it was when the shechita took place before Yom Tov. And therefore all the opinions match up. The problem with that, if we say that, is then Iachi Hainu Rabbi Yehuda. You've now made opinion number 1 and opinion number 3 in the Braita the exact same thing. And it clearly is difference. No, so it says, what's the difference? Ikar benau tefela. The difference between them is, just like when you have ikar and tafel, right? The main thing and the secondary thing. Tefela, that's the case Rabbi Yehuda spoke about, where I have these matanot which were separated before Yom Tov, and which according to everybody, I cannot deliver them to the Kohen. But if I have an animal which I shechted today, and I'm delivering those matanot to the Kohen, I can throw in the ones from yesterday. I couldn't deliver them by themselves, but they can be tafel to something else which is going to be permitted. So if we accept that interpretation, then there is a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Acherim, but actually both opinions work with our Mishnah. Ironically, the opinion which does not work according to our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi, because again, in our Mishnah, the machloket is whether between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is whether you can deliver the matanot. The truma you definitely can't, but whether you can deliver the matanot. The way Rabbi Yossi learns is exactly the opposite. Rabbi Yossi learns that according to Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, you can deliver the matanot to the Kohen on Yom Tov. What the machloket is about truma, that according to Beit Hillel, even the truma you could take on Yom Tov, which Beit Shammai says no. And now says the Gemara, in fact, that is how we paskin. Amar Rav Yehuda mashmo halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. Halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. Okay. Now again, all of this is we'll see, get into it a little bit more tomorrow. All of this is predicated, whatever opinion we accept, on the distinction between truma and matanot, which is matanot, you might be obligated to separate on Yom Tov because you didn't do shechita before, and therefore you can separate them. Whereas truma, you can always prepare beforehand. The truma can always be separated before Yom Tov. Our Gemara is now going to go to great lengths to try and find, is there a case where that is not correct? Is there a case, in fact, where you do have to separate the truma on Yom Tov? Okay, so we'll carry on talking about that tomorrow. Adkan for today. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to be learning together again.
Yeah, Shikoya, thank you very much. Good to see everybody. Thank you. Cheers.